by a show of hands, could you let me know who here would consider themselves to be an Ember developer? I saw one. One. Hey, that's good. How about Angular? All right, that's pretty much what I expected. Very good mix, and that just means that I have more people to convert to Ember tonight, which is wonderful. And I think by the end of the night, you will all be hugging each other and singing "We Love Ember." And if you don't, then I have my secret weapon, which is stickers. No one can resist the Tom sticker. So I will give those out. I'll tell you how I'll do that, and we'll go from there. So I gave this talk about 2 months ago at Frankfurt, and since then, quite a few things have changed. EmberConf happened 2 weeks ago, and they had a very large number of big announcements. So I changed my talk title just slightly. So I think now there's really even more reasons to take a look at Ember again, even if you have done so before, maybe 6 months ago, a year ago, and you thought, okay, this is not ready for production. I don't want to invest in this, it's too risky. It's hit 1.0, and it's very, very stable, and I think there's even more reasons to take a look at that. So who am I? My name is Henning Glattergötz. I'm originally from Austria. I'm actually a back-end developer. I work in PHP. So you might be wondering, why am I talking to you about front-end technologies and JavaScript? Well, I've always needed... Yes? Because I do all my work in English, and I've done so for quite a number of years. And I could do it in German, but I think you would enjoy it more in English, because my German is not, my technical German is not as fluent as my English. And standing up here for me, I'm very nervous standing in front of a big crowd, so it's just easier for me. So I hope that's all right. Okay. So I'm a backend developer, but I do need, or I have always needed, even if it's just a simple UI to display maybe a status or something of whatever's going on in my backend systems. And then around 2009, I was doing some client work, and two of the guys that were on the team from the company that I was working for and with, they said, okay, let's do this this front-end application, and we're going to do this in jQuery. And I had previously had JavaScript experience, but the jQuery app, it worked, it fulfilled its requirements. But working on it, the only thing I can say about it, it was a sad experience. It's something that I told myself, I don't want to do this anymore. This is not pretty, and it's too painful. And so I started looking around, and that was, maybe around the time I heard about Backbone, Spine, Knockout.js came along, then of course Angular, and I was like, oh, Google, Angular, this got to be good, maybe I should look at that. But I could never, commit the time to actually get into it and write code, so I only observed that from the periphery, basically. And then Ember came along, and I heard a conference talk by Yehuda Katz and Tom Dale, and I'll get to who those guys are. Most of you probably know already, but I didn't at the time. And simply what they were saying, the philosophies that they were talking about, what they wanted to do with the project, it just spoke to me, and it was something that, was very inspiring to me. So I actually decided to look at Ember before I even looked at any of the tech, just because of the people. And I can say now, after fiddling around with this for 2 years, I can basically confirm that was a good decision. So what we're going to do tonight, I'm going to talk a little bit about, there's sort of 3 sections, and the size of the text doesn't really correspond to the length of the sections, but first meta, sort of, I don't know, I call it the fluffy stuff around Ember. That's not necessarily the tech, but whatever's around it, the community and the people involved, etc. Then we're going to talk about some technical things, things that I find noteworthy that have come up in the last 6 to 8, maybe 12 months. Features, and talk a little bit about maintainability. And then we'll do sort of a hands-on thing. On my last talk I wrote an entire application, but we don't have time for that tonight, so I'm just going to go through certain steps and show you part of the build chain, build tool chain, and how we get to a finished Twitter app, basically. All right, so who has at least heard of Ember or just read about it? Almost everybody, okay. So I'm just going to go and make this really, really short. Basically, what is Ember? Ember is, what they say, a framework for creating ambitious web applications. What does that mean? This is straight from their site, and what it has come to mean for me, it's basically that they want to give you the entire experience. So basically, I know it's strange to say in the front end maybe, but full stack. So not just the actual framework for writing the application, but the community that goes around it, the tool chain to build everything all the way to deployment and of course testing. And of course it is highly opinionated, which you guys have probably heard of. And the reason for this is that basically works convention over configuration. I guess the people are split on whether this is a good thing or a bad thing. I didn't used to think this is a good thing because I didn't want to be boxed in, but I have come to the realization that in most cases it's actually a good thing to have a set of guide rails that don't let you go off into the weeds. And that's especially true when you have larger teams, because then there's no arguing over minutia, stupid little stuff, because it's set for you, and if you can all buy into that, you can be extremely productive very quickly. Of course, it also means that you have to learn the thing first, and that takes a little bit longer than for other things. There's no doubt about that. So it's either the Ember way or the highway, basically, because if you don't follow that, then you have problems. But again, I think it leads to high productivity, and that's seen in the Rails community. I'm not a Rails developer, but sometimes I wish I was, because they seem to have more fun than the PHP people. So, and also, this is what I kind of touched on. It's optimized for developer happiness. This seems kind of cheesy, or sounds kind of cheesy maybe, but it's really true. And even though in the beginning it might sound a little bit untrue, or because there is such a high learning curve, and there was so much flux in the very beginning of the project, and things changed constantly and broke, and everybody was hating on Ember Data. But they've brought it together, I think, in the last 6 to 8 months, and showed that again at the conference. It's the full package. It's the people behind it, the conferences, the community, and of course the tech is very impressive in my opinion. So then, who's behind Ember? As I said, I didn't know who Yehuda Katz and Tom Dale were. Those are the two guys that basically started this. And I heard them speak. They sounded very eloquent and well-spoken. And then I started researching them, and I found out Yehuda Katz is actually, he doesn't just sound smart, he is very smart, and he pretty much wrote half the internet. Because he was involved in Rails. He's a core committed to Rails, jQuery, Ember, obviously, Rust, and now JSON API spec, and well, that's kind of a lot. I don't know when the guy sleeps. Oh, he's on the TC39 committee as well, so he's involved in the continued development of JavaScript itself. And Tom, he worked on Sprout Core, and it was my impression at first that he might be the inspiration for the Tomster. I mean, you tell me. But I heard now that this is not true. He denies that. It supposedly is a complete coincidence. And now, since 2 weeks ago, they announced that two more core team members. So these are the folks that make up the core team. I think there might be one more, but he's not listed on the website. So these are the core committers. They're all somewhat from the same company, but mostly they are from different companies, completely different companies. They are also not all in the United States, so it's a very diverse group, which is a good thing, I think, because you then don't have these problems of one company taking the project in the direction that they want to, and there is no resistance against it. I mean, MongoDB is kind of like that, and this other framework I mentioned earlier. So then let's get to the community itself. because this, I think for me also is a really big part of Ember and why I think it's so great and just fun. So there's 2 conferences. There's EmberConf, which is in the United States every year. It's around March. It was 2 weeks ago. And then there's Emberfest, which took place last year, I think, in Spain. Of course, there are meetups all over the world. Unfortunately, I only know of one that's in Germany, and that's in Munich, and it's fairly small still. The 2 biggest, so for me, I live about 2 hours north of here. Belgium might be a little bit closer, Brussels. So the 2 biggest ones, and if you want to learn and listen to what is going on in the community, what core team members have to say, you can really check out Ember New York City and Ember London. They have excellent videos online very quickly right after and also they're monthly. And they have core team members speaking there constantly. So it's really always the latest and greatest. And of course, New York City, there's tons of companies there that employ it. And so there's a lot of expertise there. Discourse. Discourse is a forum. It's made or developed by or co-founded by the same guy that did Stack Overflow. And this is actually, like I said, forum software. He wanted to take this in a new direction. And this was one of the first, if not the first, Ember applications. And it's open source. You can go and look at it on GitHub. And then, of course, there's IRC. I like that because they have committed basically to be, the core team members are very often on IRC and will answer your questions. It has happened to me. And I was floored, and I was so happy. I said, hey, I want to buy you a beer. And he sent me his GitHub account, and so I did send him some money to buy some beer. But yeah, so that's, and I think that's because the community is still very small. So they're very involved. I mean, I wrote a companion blog post to this talk, which I did two months ago, like I said. And some guy came in and sort of was a little critical of some of the things I said, and Stefan Penna, who I'll talk about later, he's a core team member. He came in and answered the question and told him basically how he sees it. So, and that all very respectful and friendly. So I was very impressed. All right, so then some resources if you want to get into this. I would basically, there's basically you can read, listen, or watch, obviously, and a great place to start is actually just the homepage itself. They have what I think is really good documentation, and they have nice API docs that are searchable. And what was announced now is that they're going to make the documentation versioned so it ties to the version that is currently released, because that is still a bit of a problem that you might be reading documentation that applies to 2 releases ago, and that's not helpful. Or if you're stuck on a release 2 or 3 releases ago and the documentation has moved on, then you have no docs anymore. So they're going to version it and you can choose whatever you want to read. Another very useful thing to me is basically it's a curated list. This is an email list that comes out weekly, obviously, as the name says. And basically it'll come to you on Monday, have a list of all the events that happened in the past week, maybe blog posts that came out, podcasts, code that was released, libraries of interest, any releases in the project itself, etc. Very helpful. Another great source of information for me is our podcasts. I really like podcasts. All of these people are interested in promoting their project, so they are very willing to come on various shows. So Emberland, for example, is hosted by one of the core team members and sponsored by Dockyard. They hired Robert Jackson, basically. He's the release manager for Ember. And they have very short episodes, once a week or once every 2 weeks, about very specific subjects, very interesting and very useful. The Front Side is a podcast that is very Ember-centric. It's by a company called The Front Side, and they are basically a consultancy that does Ember work. And Brendan Hayes, who's one of the founders of the company, is actually a conference speaker, so it's fun to listen to and also always very, I think, informative. JavaScript Jabber, I think everybody probably knows or should know. It's the JavaScript podcast. They always have the latest developments, and guys on. So something to listen to. Descriptive, Khalil talked about that already. I'm just going to put in a shameless plug. There's a few episodes that are Ember specific. He had Sean Devine on, which he's the host of the Ruby on Rails podcast, but he's getting into Ember now, and he's very eloquent and explains very well why he likes it and how he's transitioned into that. Also, Brendan Hayes was on, and I'm going to start being on that podcast as a co-host, so please sign up. Let's do it. The Changelog is an open source podcast. Also has Ember guys on every now and then, so very useful. Really, this is something where you can really have. I mean, there's no other way to have Yehuda Katz tell you what he's doing. I mean, that's extremely helpful in explaining things in detail. So I can highly recommend that. Obviously, YouTube, I already mentioned New York City and Ember London, as well as the conferences. They all have their videos online for their talks. Extremely helpful, very useful. EmberConf 2015 took a week to get their talks out, and they're really amazing. The keynote, if you don't watch anything else, watch the keynote just to see what those guys are like and what they're about. Some of the tools that I want to mention that I think have changed things quite a lot in the last few months is first thing, Ember Cli. That's now the command line, the official command line tool or build tool for Ember. And I'll show you how that works just very, very briefly. But essentially what that is, it gives you an npm install for your entire Ember build pipeline. And you can customize it if you want to, but essentially you can install that, say Ember new, my app, and you get a skeleton, and you can hit the ground running and start learning Ember there, instead of where I started when I started doing this 2 years ago. Have to figure out how do I make this work by having to learn the entire build pipeline. I'm like I said, I'm a backend developer, wasn't familiar with all the technologies, and if you list all the things that you need to know in order to build a good build pipeline, it's really quite a huge list. So this just does it for you out of the box. I can't say enough good things about it. It basically takes your entry point from level 0 to maybe floor 10 or something like that. It also supports ES6 modules, so you can write your code in ES6 modules, super nice and clean, and it transpiles it into ES5. And Ember Inspector is this tool you see in the bottom here. It's basically a plugin for Chrome and Firefox. It's available now, I think, and it is essentially goes and looks at your application and visualizes it for you in these various panes, so you can see the view hierarchy or the template hierarchy, the routes, the actual data. If you're using Ember Data, you can see all the records that are being loaded in, what's in the store right now. You can modify it if you want to. It'll give you information on what system you're on right now, and a few other things that I haven't even gotten into yet. Very, very helpful, extremely helpful for starting out when you don't understand everything yet, just to get a visual of how it all fits together. I found this extremely useful. So then some of the features that I find noteworthy, Ember Data is, I think, instant magic. And the reason I put the but here is because if you don't have an API that conforms to what Ember Data expects, which has changed already now again, but they have adapters now that basically will transform, I think it's a JSON API out of the box now. But if you have, for example, a JSON API or an API that supports the HAL standard, you can basically just install an adapter for that, and you can use that. So those two you can get basically for free. And then if you want to customize something, you can write your own serializers and adapters to munch the data into whatever Ember Data expects. So there's a decision you have to make on how much effort you want to put into doing that, or just forgetting Ember Data altogether and going with plain Ajax, or many of the other layers libraries that exist for this thing. But I mean, I'll show you afterwards how simple it is. I think it's great. Then components. We heard a little bit about components already, actually quite a lot. Ember Data basically tries to implement web components today that will be available in the browsers in the future, and it's their own version of it that is fairly close to what's being proposed or what's coming out. And essentially what they're trying to do is provide that functionality now and give you a very painless transition into the actual real web components when they're available. So you can then transition those to actual web components and use them anywhere, in Angular or whatever. With Ember Cli, you can actually package these now and distribute them. You can push them up to NPM and just do an NPM install across your projects, or put it out there as an open source project and share it. So they have that tied in now too. Basically, the sharing and distributing of code is much simpler now. Another thing that I think is noteworthy, one of the big things with these JavaScript heavy front end apps is that the first boot is not very fast compared to just a plain HTML page. So what they've done here is there's actually an outside company that was so interested in this, they sponsored this project, which the two main guys are working on. And essentially what this is they're running Ember, the framework, inside of Node. They're rendering the HTML page that is being, or the URL that is being requested. They render that on the server and then basically send the HTML back. And they can do that. They demonstrated this at the keynote. Essentially, you can turn your Ember app into a static engine that's returning HTML only. And it's extremely fast. So interesting for mobile things. And it's also going to be, I don't know when it comes out, but it's just simply going to be part of Ember, and just basically a configuration you set in Ember Cli and say, I want this, and then it'll run. So this is a very hard problem to solve, but they're doing it for you, or for us. Then there's this new thing called Glimmer. So there was this very embarrassing demonstration that somebody did at ReactConf. Basically compared React, Ember, and Angular on a very database-intensive application where React was basically blew Ember completely out of the water. It was pathetic, and they basically came out and said, "Okay, we're gonna match this," and they went and said, "Yes, we didn't do a very good job on this." They admitted that. They went back and rewrote their rendering engine, presented it at the keynote 2 weeks ago, and it's as fast or faster in some cases than React itself now. So they basically said, okay, React has some really good concepts. We didn't really go down the right path with ours, so we're going to adapt what they did, and it works really nicely. There's actually even a demo out there, I think it's called DB Monster, right? You can go and install that and compare the two. And it's also funny when you see them show this at the keynote, because they basically put on screen, Ryan Florence is the guy's name, put this video on there saying, hey, Ember sucks. And then they proved him wrong. What else? Maintainability is also something I consider a feature, because I have had this experience myself where, a framework that I committed to learning basically ended in the 1X series, and then they did a complete rewrite on version 2. And even though version 2 was way better, and this was Symfony, by the way, there was no clear way to go from 1 to 2 easily. And basically what I have now is I'm stuck with a whole bunch of apps that I have to maintain in Symfony 1, and that's just sad. So these guys, they basically committed to a 6-week release cycle, which is very similar to what Chrome does. And that ensures that they can only push out small changes, in these increments. And the upgrade path for the developer to move their framework along is much, much smaller than, if you have a rewrite or you have months or, half a year in between releases. Then the next thing they basically announced was version 2 is coming out in June. And that's not really what I'm excited about. The thing that is really cool is all of these tools that are listed here, they will come out in version 1 on that same date, and all these projects are basically committing to go in lockstep with this Ember versioning system with the actual main project. So what that means is that when Ember moves along, everybody else moves along too, and nobody makes breaking changes unless the main project makes breaking changes. So you've probably experienced this if you have some kind of tool chain and you won't move one thing along, and then all of a sudden the whole thing doesn't work because some downstream component doesn't work and it hasn't been updated yet, and now you're stuck. So they're basically, again, trying to provide the entire experience, a nice experience to the whole package, basically, the full stack. So those are the things that I kind of wanted to mention, and I think that stand out, that make this interesting and exciting. So now I wanted to go and show you a little bit of code. Come on. All right, so what we're going to do is basically write, well, we're not going to write it. We're going to look at the app that I wrote. It's basically a Twitter client that allows us to set the search term for what tweets we want to look for. And it will use the Twitter API, the Twitter REST API, to go and fetch 15 tweets that match that, the latest 15 tweets that match that. And then once those are loaded, it connects to WebSockets, and basically that is a proxy to the streaming API from Twitter, and then it basically starts just streaming tweets on the screen. So it's a real-time kind of thing. So there's two components to this. There's a Node backend, which, this, by the way, well, I'll tell you later, but you can get the code for this. So we'll start up that. And just to show you the thing I mentioned earlier with Ember CLI. So to start a new app, I would just do this, Ember new my app. Oh, oops, already exists. Okay, fine. And another thing that's really cool is their error messages and their deprecation warnings are very nice. I mean, like I said, I'm not an total expert in JavaScript, but debugging it was always a bit of a problem, and their error messages are really nice. So while this goes and does its thing, we'll just look at essentially what's happening now. It's installing the packages necessary to provide the build system, and it also installs a skeleton application that actually runs.
Was can be done,
Sorry?
Was can be done.
Yeah, thanks. All right, so this was CD my app 2, I think. So if we go and look at that now, so this is the structure of the entire project now. You could basically commit this to Git and start working on it. You see the typical things, Bower components, node modules, and so on. But the actual application that we're interested in, the code that's in here, is in the app folder. And essentially, you can see that it's all very cleanly organized. There's components, controllers, helpers, models, routes, styles, etc. Once the application gets a little too big, so what this means is you put every route file goes in the routes folder, obviously. But once you get too many of these, there's sort of a disconnect. You have, let's say, in our case, it's going to be tweets. You have a tweets endpoint or a tweets route. So there's going to be one file for tweets in templates, in routes, in models, in controllers. Now you have to always switch between those. Maybe not so convenient, especially when you have a lot of files. So what this also supports is to invert the whole thing and basically say, I have a tweets pod is what they call them, or pods. And you put all the related files in that one directory. So you have the route, the template, the controller, maybe the helpers all together right next to each other physically. So you can basically configure that however you want to. So there's not much here to see. This is sort of the default. There's nothing in the router itself. A lot of the things come by basically for free. So if I say Ember serve, it's going to now build it and tell us to upgrade our node and basically serve it up. So there's an Express app built in that serves up this application now on localhost 4200. And I think, no. And this is all it is. So if we look at the Ember Inspector, so essentially you see the view hierarchy. This is what happens when you hover over something. It basically tells you, it shows you on the screen where that template is rendered, where the outlet is that gets rendered into. It shows you the involved template, of course, the model, if there is one. There isn't in this case, obviously, the controller, and so on. And then it'll list out all the routes of your application. It tells you what you're currently in. So we're in the index route. And if you had Ember Data, that stuff would show up here. So that's basically the starting point that you get with a simple Ember Data, Ember CLI new. But I have prepared a little more. So we'll close this out and look at the demo. So let's start with the models. I guess if we look at the back end, so I have two endpoints, two REST endpoints. One of them is the settings that basically just tells me what the hashtag or the search term is that we want to look for. By default here now it's Starbucks. I don't really want that. I did that for testing because there's a lot going on there. That's why I used that. Oh no, it's gone through. Okay. Refresh would probably help. There we go. So there's that endpoint, and then there is the tweets themselves. So this basically is the REST endpoint that gets proxied to Twitter itself, and I basically reformatted the models to be what I want them to be in my app. And so let's go and look at the models themselves. And there is this, and there is this. So there's really nothing to the settings. There's just a model object with one element in it. ID is assumed, and the hashtag, as you saw over here, that's just this value right here. So there's not much to see there. Oops. So here it's basically a one-to-one on this here. So again, the ID is assumed. That's just a convention for Ember Data, and then it's pretty much one-to-one. This is all it takes to define to Ember Data that I want to talk to this endpoint, and these are the things that I want you to load in. And by simply naming it, which you can see up here, it's called tweets. This endpoint is called tweets. That's it. There's no more configuration, no code to write, nothing. If you had a mismatch, and you can't do this one-to-one thing, of course you can define, hey, go to this endpoint, the name of it is this is the URL. But if you have something that conforms to Ember Data's wishes, then that's all it takes. And that's why I said instant magic. Because essentially what happens now is I just tell it in the controller. That's the next thing that we want to look at. Or actually, no, sorry, in the route. So you can see a pattern here. So there's a tweet model, it's singular, and everything else is plural. So you have the tweets route. And, well, we've already wired this up for sockets too, but this is basically the model hook where I tell, if you go to the /tweets route, perform a find on the store for the model tweet, basically meaning give me everything that's in the store of type tweet. And that's it. And basically what it'll do, it'll go and fetch every single thing that the API returns and hand it to the controller. And the controller will hand it to the template, which is tweets, and basically render that. This is still handlebars. They've since switched to HTML bars. The syntax is the same. I haven't had time to upgrade this project, but I will do that. And this is all it is. So this will basically render all the tweets in order. And what else is there? On the tweets route controller, in the controller we basically can also specify a sort order. So how it's going to pull the models out of the store. So the store in Ember Data is basically the collection of all the models that have been loaded in that are there, and it's sort of like a cache. It's a cache in your app. And what we can do here in the controller is basically say, I want you to sort on the property ID, and sort ascending is false, so it's descending. So what's going to happen is basically sort all the tweets in reverse order, put the newest one at the top, and keep that even when new tweets come in, or if something was deleted, it would still keep that sort order. And here again, it's built in pretty much 2 lines of code, and you get that. This here is basically just the actions that are listening for the events on the socket. There's not really too much to that. You install an add-on that basically loads Ember WebSockets in here for you. And in the route, you specify the URL for the socket, which is on this server as well. And the mixin you want to use, put in the mixin. These actions listening for essentially on-message events. You go and you unpack the payload. I just log it to the console, and then you push it into the store. So instead of having the store pull it from the API and load it in, you can simply push objects onto the store as well. And let's look at that now, how that all works. So we said the backend is running. Either in use or okay. Again, please. All right. So I just made basically a shortcut for myself because I'm too lazy to type it all. Essentially, what was there is it's Ember serve and then a string telling it where to proxy the requests. So you can see here it's proxying to localhost on 8001, and then it's serving up on localhost 4200. So if we go and look at that, this is essentially what the app looks like. Not really much to it. Let's open the Ember Inspector. And all right, so we're in the application route, or the index route, which doesn't display anything. But when we go to the tweets route, you basically start seeing some action. It now pulled the last 15 tweets rather, from the API and put them in the store, and you can see that here. So if you go to the Ember Data tab, essentially you can see what's going on what was loaded in, and you can look at these in detail if you wanted to. You can look at all the various properties. You can even modify it for testing just to see what's going on. Settings, we got one. We got Karlsruhe.js. We can change that to, let's say, I don't know, Starbucks is what we had in there before. Save. Go back to tweets just to get a little bit of a sense of how this looks when there's a lot going on. So, and then if you look at the Ember Inspector again, you can see that essentially the tweet models, they're coming in at a fairly rapid pace, and since this is just a demo, it's obviously going to hit some boundary and then something sad will happen, but we're not going to let it go there. So what I wanted you to do now to get a sticker is to go and get your phones out and send out some tweets about Karlsruhe.js. So if you want a sticker, Karlsruhe.js, tweet away, and whoever does that will get a sticker. Come on! Because last time it was like nobody was doing anything. I was like, all right, something's happening. Come and see me afterwards, starting with Pascal. And if he's here, I don't know. No, he's in Vienna. Never mind. All right. Oh, there we go. Yeah, send out something like, hey, we're at Karlsruhe.js, had an awesome Polymer talk. And that basically concludes my my demo. And all right, a little bit of something going on here. What I wanted to say briefly here now is, well, thank you obviously for paying attention, and follow me on Twitter if you'd like to. And this link here will take you to a blog post that is specifically about this talk. All the information that I gave now is basically lined out or talked about a little more in detail, and all the links are provided, so you don't have to go searching yourself. It might be a good starting point if you want to get into Ember and go from there. Thank you. Any questions? Yes.
You showed this blueprint magic with the browser. How far does it go with Ember? Does it create more REST APIs like find all and something like this, or is it only this one?
No, you basically have a set of methods on the store where you can either specify, find one by ID, for example. So if you have relations, you can say, okay, get the ID from this parent, and then load something else that's related to it. So you can specifically say, get this one, or you can do a find all. Obviously, you have save and just the sort of standard.
But it's not automatically binded with a Blueprint API.
Blueprint API.
Blueprint API is for me something like I have my model and the typical REST API like the name / ID is, for example, searching for it only like a find or find all with all this kind of.
All you need to do is you specify the model itself. I'm not sure if I understand the question, but you basically tell Ember Data what the model looks like, that basically you're expecting the data in that format. And then if you have an API that conforms to, with put, posts, delete, patch, and all that stuff, the methods that you use on the store will automatically decide what needs to happen in order to either fetch the data, delete it, or update it. So of that nature. Does that answer the question?
Almost.
Okay, well, come see me afterwards. Yeah. Okay. Yes?
How's the integration with third-party libraries?
Like Bootstrap, or I don't know. I mean, I use Bootstrap here. There's basically, for a lot of things, there are add-ons. So it's just npm install. I think there's like 700 different add-ons at this point that do various things. but they have, like Firebase and various other services they integrate with. I don't know if you have a specific one in mind or
Leaflet.
don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if that's the map application,
Yes.
right? You could probably do that yourself fairly easily, but I don't know of anything that's out of the box for Leaflet. No.
Okay.
Anyone? All right. Thank you.
Thanks.